They thought ignoring her would cost nothing, but within minutes, that quiet decision would echo through the entire room like a mistake no one could undo. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. And if you believe respect should never be based on appearances, hit like and subscribe. These stories matter. Now, back to Sophia Bennett. The restaurant glowed under soft amber lighting, the kind that made polished marble floors shimmer and crystal glasses catch reflections like tiny stars. It was a Friday evening in downtown Chicago, just past 7:30 p.m., when the dinner rush was at its peak, and every table seemed alive with conversation, laughter, and the quiet clink of silverware. Outside, a line of well-dressed guests waited patiently, hoping for a table in one of the city's most exclusive dining spots, a place where reservations were booked weeks in advance and appearances often spoke louder than names. The front doors opened gently, almost unnoticed, and Sophia Bennett stepped inside. She wore a simple beige cardigan over a white blouse, dark jeans, and flat shoes that barely made a sound against the polished floor. No designer labels, no flashy jewelry, nothing that demanded attention. Her hair was tied back loosely, and her expression remained calm, almost observant, as her eyes adjusted to the warm glow of the room. For a moment, she stood there quietly, just inside the entrance, as if waiting for someone to acknowledge her presence. No one did. The hostess, busy assisting a couple in tailored suits, didn't look up. A server passed by carrying a tray of wine glasses, his gaze sliding past Sophia as if she were part of the decor. Even the manager, stationed near the bar, glanced briefly in her direction before turning his attention to a group of high-spending regulars. It wasn't hostility. It was something subtler. She was invisible. Sophia didn't react. She simply walked forward at an unhurried pace, her posture relaxed, her eyes steady, as though she had all the time in the world. She approached the host's stand and waited, hands resting lightly at her sides. Seconds passed, then a full minute. The couple in front of her was escorted to a table with smiles and polite conversation, the hostess's voice warm and attentive. When she returned, her eyes skimmed over Sophia again, hesitating for just a fraction of a second before shifting away, as if unsure whether to engage or ignore. Sophia said nothing. She didn't interrupt, didn't demand attention. She just waited, her presence quiet but unwavering, like someone who had learned long ago that patience could reveal more than words ever could. Across the room, laughter rose from a table near the windows, champagne being poured, chairs pulled out with care. The contrast was unmistakable. Every detail of the restaurant whispered exclusivity, precision, and status. And yet, standing there in her simple clothes, Sophia Bennett seemed to exist outside of it all, untouched by the rhythm of service that flowed so effortlessly around everyone else. Another server brushed past her, nearly bumping her shoulder, offering a distracted apology without meeting her eyes. The room continued as if nothing was wrong, as if nothing unusual was happening. But somewhere beneath the surface, something had already begun to shift. And though no one in that restaurant could feel it yet, the quiet woman standing by the host's stand was not someone who had been overlooked by accident. She was someone they had chosen to ignore. And that choice was about to cost them everything. The room, still full of chatter and clinking glasses, had no idea how close it was to falling completely silent. The seconds stretched just long enough to become noticeable, not loud enough to draw attention, but long enough to feel intentional. Sophia remained at the host's stand, her posture unchanged, her expression composed, as if she had anticipated this exact moment long before she walked through those doors. The hostess returned again, this time accompanied by a man in a tailored navy suit who spoke quickly and confidently, his watch catching the light as he gestured toward the dining room. They exchanged a few polite words, and without hesitation, she led him past Sophia toward a corner table that had just been cleared. Not once did she acknowledge the woman still standing directly in front of her. A faint crease formed between Sophia's brows, not from frustration, but from recognition. This was not oversight. This was judgment. To her left, a young couple approached the stand, dressed in business casual attire, no more formal than she was. The hostess greeted them instantly, her tone warm, her smile practiced. Within seconds, menus were placed in their hands, and they were guided into the dining room as if they had always belonged there. Sophia's gaze followed them briefly, then returned to the empty space in front of her. Still, she said nothing. A server approached the stand, placing a stack of menus down with a quiet thud. He glanced at Sophia, his eyes flickering over her outfit, then leaned toward the hostess and whispered something under his breath. The hostess gave a small nod, barely noticeable, before turning away again. The message had been received. Across the room, a group of diners laughed loudly, the sound echoing against the high ceilings. Glasses clinked, plates were delivered, conversations flowed effortlessly. It was a performance of perfection, every movement choreographed, every guest treated as though they were the most important person in the room. Every guest, except one. Sophia shifted her weight slightly, her hands now loosely clasped in front of her. Her eyes moved slowly across the space, taking in the details others ignored. The manager near the bar, checking his tablet. The bartender polishing the same glass for the third time. The server who had almost bumped into her now laughing with a table of regulars. She noticed everything, not with irritation, but with quiet clarity. Time passed. 2 minutes. Then 3. Long enough that a subtle discomfort began to ripple beneath the surface of the moment. Not for Sophia, but for the space around her. A busser hesitated as he walked by, glancing at her with uncertainty, as if sensing that something about this situation was not quite right. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it, and continued on. Sophia finally leaned forward slightly, placing her fingertips gently on the edge of the host's stand. Her voice, when it came, was calm, steady, and almost soft enough to be overlooked. "Excuse me." The hostess turned, clearly startled, as though she had forgotten Sophia was there at all. "Yes." Her tone carried a thin layer of impatience, quickly masked by a professional smile that did not reach her eyes. "I believe I have been waiting for a table," Sophia said, her words measured, free of accusation. The hostess blinked, scanning her mentally as if trying to place her in a category that made sense. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her voice polite, but edged with doubt. Sophia held her gaze for a moment, then answered simply, "No." The pause that followed was subtle, but heavy. The hostess's expression shifted, just slightly, into something more dismissive. "I am afraid we are fully booked tonight. You may want to try another place nearby." The words landed softly, but the meaning behind them was unmistakable. Around them, the restaurant continued its rhythm, unaware that a line had just been drawn. Sophia straightened, her expression unchanged, her eyes steady as she looked directly at the hostess. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. And then, without a word, Sophia reached into her bag. Her fingers moved with deliberate calm as she reached into her bag, not rushed, not hesitant, as if every second unfolding in that moment had already been measured in her mind long before she arrived. The hostess watched her with a polite impatience that bordered on dismissal, her attention already drifting toward the next guest approaching the entrance. But something in Sophia's stillness held the moment in place, stretching it just enough to feel different. Slowly, Sophia withdrew a small object and placed it gently on the polished surface of the host's stand. It was not flashy, not large, just a slim, matte black card with a subtle metallic edge that caught the warm light for a brief second before settling into quiet stillness. There was no logo visible from a distance, no bold lettering demanding attention. At first glance, it looked ordinary. The hostess barely glanced at it. "You can leave your name if you would like to wait," she said, her tone already shifting back to routine, her hand reaching for a reservation tablet. Sophia did not move her hand away from the card. She simply let it rest there, her fingertips lightly touching its edge, as though it carried more weight than its size suggested. "I will not need to wait," she said quietly. The words were not forceful, but they carried a certainty that did not match her appearance. The hostess paused, just for a fraction of a second, then gave a small, polite smile that did not quite hide her skepticism. "I understand," she replied, though her tone suggested the opposite. Just behind Sophia, another group entered, their presence immediately drawing the hostess's attention. She turned away again, greeting them warmly, her voice rising in a practiced rhythm of hospitality. For a moment, the card remained unnoticed, a quiet detail in a busy space. Then, the server who had whispered earlier returned to the stand. He reached for a menu, his eyes scanning the surface casually, until they landed on the card. His hand froze mid-motion. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. His posture straightened, his expression tightening as his gaze lingered on the small object. He leaned closer, just slightly, as if confirming what he was seeing. The color drained from his face in a way that could not be explained by lighting alone. Without a word, he glanced at Sophia, then back at the card, then quickly toward the manager across the room. His movements changed instantly, no longer relaxed, no longer casual. Urgency replaced indifference. He leaned toward the hostess, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through her routine. "You need to look at this," he whispered. The hostess frowned, annoyed at the interruption, but followed his gaze. At first, her expression remained unchanged. Then, slowly, something flickered behind her eyes. Confusion, then recognition. Her hand hovered over the card but did not touch it, as if uncertain whether she should. The room around them continued as usual, unaware of the shift happening at the front. Laughter still echoed, glasses still clinked, conversations still flowed. But at the host's stand, the air had changed. The hostess swallowed, her professional composure beginning to crack at the edges. She looked at Sophia again, this time not as someone to dismiss, but as someone she did not fully understand. The server had already stepped back, his eyes fixed on the manager, silently urging him to come over. And though no announcement had been made, no voice had been raised, the balance of the room had begun to tilt. Sophia remained exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, as if she had simply placed a fact on the table and was waiting for the world around her to catch up. And for the first time since she walked in, she was no longer invisible. The manager noticed before he was called, not because of the card itself, but because of the shift in behavior around it. Years of running a high-end dining room had trained him to read more than words, to sense when something in the atmosphere was no longer aligned. He looked up from his tablet, his eyes narrowing slightly as he caught sight of the server standing too still, the hostess no longer smiling, and the woman at the stand who had somehow become the center of a silence no one else had yet recognized. He moved quickly, but not hurriedly, weaving through tables with controlled steps, his expression composed but alert. Guests barely noticed him pass, but the staff did. Subtle glances followed him, questions forming without being asked. By the time he reached the host's stand, the hostess had already stepped half a pace back, as if giving space to something she did not want responsibility for. The card remained exactly where Sophia had placed it. The manager's gaze dropped to it, and for a brief moment, nothing in his expression changed. Then, like a crack beneath glass, something shifted. His posture straightened almost imperceptibly. His hand hovered just above the surface but did not touch the card, as though he understood immediately that this was not something to be handled casually. He looked up at Sophia, really looked this time, not at her clothes, not at her appearance, but at her face, her calm, steady presence that now seemed entirely out of place with the assumptions made just minutes ago. The room behind him continued its rhythm, but closer now, the sounds felt slightly muted, like a distant echo rather than a dominant force. "Good evening," the manager said, his voice measured, respectful in a way it had not been before. There was a subtle shift in tone, not dramatic, but unmistakable to anyone trained to hear it. Sophia met his gaze without urgency, without triumph, simply acknowledging him as though this moment had always been inevitable. "Good evening," she replied. The manager glanced once more at the card, then back at her, and in that exchange, a silent understanding passed between them. It was not spoken, but it was clear. He turned slightly toward the hostess, his voice low but firm. "Please prepare table 7 immediately." The hostess blinked, startled, her mind catching up to the command. Table 7 was not just any table. It was reserved. Always reserved. She hesitated for half a second too long. "Now," he repeated, this time with quiet authority that allowed no delay. "Yes, of course," she said quickly, already moving, her earlier confidence replaced by urgency. The server who had first noticed the card stepped aside, his expression tight, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of relief and unease. The manager turned back to Sophia, offering a gesture toward the dining room, his demeanor now entirely different from the indifference she had been met with upon arrival. "If you would please follow me," he said. Around them, A few nearby guests had begun to notice the shift, the subtle change in tone, the way staff members were now moving with heightened precision. Nothing had been announced, but something had clearly changed. Sophia did not reach for the card immediately. She let it remain there for just a moment longer, allowing the weight of the situation to settle fully into the space. Then, with the same calm precision she had shown from the beginning, she picked it up and slipped it back into her bag. As she followed the manager into the dining room, conversations continued, but softer now, as if the room itself was beginning to sense what the staff already knew. And though no one at the surrounding tables could yet explain why, the balance of the evening had shifted in a way that would not easily return to what it had been. Table 7 sat near the center of the dining room, not by the windows where the city lights glittered, and not tucked away in a quiet corner, but in a position that commanded quiet attention without asking for it. It was the kind of table reserved for people who did not need to request anything twice, the kind of table that staff instinctively prioritized without being told. As Sophia approached, guided by the manager, the subtle shift in the room became more noticeable. Conversations did not stop, but they softened, like a current losing strength. A few guests glanced up, their eyes following the manager with curiosity, then settling briefly on Sophia, trying to understand what they had missed. The manager pulled out the chair for her with a level of care that had not been present earlier, his movements precise, deliberate. Sophia sat gracefully, her posture relaxed, as if she had always belonged exactly where she was. "Thank you," she said simply. The manager gave a slight nod, but did not leave immediately. Instead, he remained for a moment longer, as though waiting for an unspoken cue, his professional composure now carrying a trace of caution. A server approached quickly, not the one from before, but someone more experienced, his uniform impeccable, his expression attentive in a way that bordered on careful. "Good evening," he said, placing a menu gently in front of her, his tone respectful, measured. "May I bring you something to drink while you look over the menu?" Sophia glanced at the menu briefly, then looked up at him, her gaze steady but calm. "Water will be fine for now," she replied. "Of course," he said immediately, stepping back with quiet efficiency. Across the room, the hostess remained at her stand, but her movements were no longer fluid. She checked the reservation system again, then again, as if trying to reconcile what she had just witnessed with the rules she believed governed the space. The server who had first noticed the card avoided looking in Sophia's direction altogether, focusing instead on his assigned tables with unusual intensity. The manager finally stepped back, but his attention did not fully leave. He moved toward the bar, speaking quietly with another staff member, his eyes occasionally returning to table 7. The ripple effect continued, subtle but undeniable. Guests nearby began to notice the difference in service, the way attention seemed to orbit that one table, the way staff adjusted their pace, their tone, their posture whenever they passed by. It was not loud. It was not obvious, but it was there. Sophia sat quietly, her hands resting lightly on the table, her expression unchanged. She did not rush to open the menu, did not look around to observe the reactions she had triggered. She simply existed within the space, calm, composed, as if the entire sequence of events had unfolded exactly as expected. When the server returned with her water, he placed it carefully in front of her, ensuring the glass aligned perfectly with the edge of the table. "If you have any questions about the menu, I would be happy to assist," he said, his voice steady but respectful in a way that carried more weight now than politeness alone. Sophia gave a small nod. "I will let you know," she said. He stepped back again, but not before casting a brief glance toward the manager, as if seeking silent confirmation that everything was being handled correctly. The room continued, but the earlier ease had shifted into something more aware, more observant. It was as if the restaurant itself had begun to recognize that something had changed, even if it could not yet name what it was. And at the center of that shift, Sophia Bennett sat quietly, her presence no longer overlooked, her silence now carrying more authority than any introduction ever could. The performance of perfection continued, but now it was being watched from a different angle, one where every detail mattered, and every assumption carried a cost. The rhythm of the dining room continued, but it no longer felt effortless. It felt observed, measured. Every movement now carried a subtle awareness that had not existed before, as though the staff understood, without saying it aloud, that they were no longer simply serving guests, they were being evaluated. Sophia lifted her glass of water, taking a slow, quiet sip, her gaze briefly drifting across the room, not searching, not judging, simply noticing. The details revealed themselves easily now. The slight hesitation in a server's step as he passed her table. The way the manager adjusted his tie for the third time in under a minute. The hostess, still at the front, no longer smiling as easily, her attention divided between incoming guests and the lingering weight of what she had missed. A couple seated at a nearby table leaned closer together, their voices lowered as they glanced towards Sophia, curiosity replacing their earlier indifference. They could sense something had shifted, even if they could not explain why. The server returned, this time with a renewed precision in his movements, placing a neatly folded napkin beside her plate, adjusting the angle of her glass ever so slightly. "Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes?" he asked, his tone careful, respectful, but no longer routine. "A few more minutes," Sophia replied calmly, her voice steady, unhurried. "Of course," he said immediately, stepping back with a small nod. Across the room, the manager spoke quietly into his phone, his voice low, his expression focused. Whatever he was confirming, it was not a casual conversation. His eyes flicked towards Sophia again, then away, then back once more, as if each glance reinforced what he already knew but still needed to process. The air around table 7 carried a different weight now, one that extended beyond service. It was expectation, not from Sophia, but from everyone else. The expectation that something had already been set in motion, something they were now part of whether they realized it or not. A senior staff member approached the manager, whispering something urgently. The manager listened, then nodded once, his expression tightening before smoothing out again into practiced composure. He walked back towards Sophia's table, slower this time, more deliberate, as though choosing his words before he even arrived. Sophia noticed him approach, but did not shift in her seat. She simply set her glass down, her hands resting lightly on the table, her posture unchanged. "Ma'am," the manager said, his voice quieter now, more careful than before. There was a pause, brief but heavy with meaning. "I want to personally ensure that your experience this evening meets the highest standard." Sophia looked at him, her expression calm, unreadable, her eyes steady in a way that made it impossible to tell whether she was pleased, indifferent, or simply observing. "I am sure it will," she replied. The simplicity of her response left no room for interpretation, and yet it carried a quiet authority that lingered in the space between them. The manager nodded again, but did not immediately step away. For a moment, he stood there, as though waiting for something more, something that would confirm how to proceed. But Sophia offered nothing further. No demand, no explanation, just silence. And in that silence, the realization settled deeper into the room. Whatever they had assumed about her when she first walked in had been wrong. Not slightly wrong, but completely. The kind of wrong that could not be corrected with faster service or polite words alone. Around them, the restaurant continued, but now every detail felt sharper, every movement more deliberate, every glance more aware. And at the center of it all, Sophia Bennett remained exactly as she had been from the beginning. Quiet, composed, and entirely in control of a situation she had never needed to raise her voice to change. The moment did not arrive with noise. It arrived with recognition, quiet but undeniable, like a truth finally spoken in a room that had been pretending not to hear it. The manager's phone vibrated once more in his hand, and this time he did not ignore it. He stepped aside, answering quickly, his voice low, but his posture already giving away the shift before a single word was exchanged. "Yes," he said, his tone suddenly sharpened with attention, his eyes flicking towards Sophia as he listened. There was a pause, longer than the others, and then something in his expression changed completely. It was not confusion anymore. It was certainty. Absolute, undeniable certainty. "I understand," he replied quietly, his voice now carrying a weight that had not been there before. "I will handle it immediately." He ended the call and stood still for a brief second, as if recalibrating everything he thought he knew about the past 15 minutes. Then he turned, not toward the bar, not toward the staff, but directly toward table 7. His steps were quicker now, not rushed, but purposeful in a way that drew attention without needing to announce itself. A nearby server paused mid-stride, watching him pass. A guest lowered his glass slightly, sensing the shift without understanding it. And as the manager reached Sophia's table, the air seemed to tighten, as though the room itself was holding its breath. "Ma'am," he began, but this time the word carried something deeper than politeness. It carried acknowledgement. Real acknowledgement. Sophia looked up at him, her expression unchanged, her calm steady as ever. There was no surprise in her eyes, no curiosity, only a quiet patience that suggested she had been waiting for this exact moment. "I owe you an apology," the manager said, his voice clear, controlled, but unmistakably sincere. Not the kind of apology offered out of obligation, but the kind that comes when a mistake has been fully understood. What happened at the entrance should never have occurred. His words were careful, deliberate, chosen with precision, but beneath them was something rawer, something that could not be fully hidden. Respect had replaced assumption. The hostess, still at her stand, had stopped moving entirely now, her eyes fixed on the interaction, her earlier confidence replaced by a growing realization she could no longer ignore. The server who had first noticed the card stood a few feet away, his posture rigid, his attention locked on the manager's every word. Sophia let the apology settle in the space between them before responding. "It is not the delay that concerns me," she said calmly. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the small radius of the table with absolute clarity. "It is the assumption behind it." The words did not rise, did not accuse, but they landed with a precision that made them impossible to dismiss. The manager held her gaze, and for a brief moment, he did not respond. Because there was nothing to correct, nothing to clarify, only something to accept. "You are absolutely right," he said finally, his voice lower now, more grounded. "And it will be addressed." The promise was not loud, but it carried weight. Not just for Sophia, but for everyone within earshot. A few nearby guests had turned slightly in their seats, their conversations fading into the background as they tried to piece together what was unfolding. The rhythm of the restaurant had slowed, just enough to feel the change. Sophia nodded once, not in approval, not in dismissal, but in acknowledgement that the moment had reached its truth. She did not ask for compensation. She did not raise her voice. She did not demand anything further. And somehow, that made everything around her adjust even more. Because this was never about what she could take from the situation. It was about what the situation revealed. The manager straightened slightly, his role now clear in a way it had not been before. "If there is anything I can personally ensure for you this evening, please let me know," he said. Sophia's gaze softened just slightly, but her composure remained intact. "Just ensure that the next person who walks in is seen," she replied. The words lingered in the air, quiet but powerful, and for a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. And then, slowly, the room began to understand what had just happened. Not fully, not completely, but enough to feel it. Enough to know that something had shifted far beyond a simple dining experience. And that silence, the one that had been building since the moment she walked in, was no longer coming. It was already here. The silence did not break. It deepened, settling over the room like something tangible, something that could be felt even by those who had not heard a single word of the exchange. Conversations resumed, but softer now, more measured, as if every guest instinctively understood that they were witnessing the aftermath of something important, something that had shifted the balance of the space in a way that could not be undone. The manager stepped back from Sophia's table, but his posture remained different, no longer the confident authority who controlled the room, but someone who now understood he was responsible for restoring something that had been quietly broken. He turned toward the front, his eyes locking onto the hostess, and this time, there was no hesitation in his movement. The distance between them felt longer than before, not because of space, but because of what now stood between them. The hostess straightened as he approached, her hands tightening slightly around the edge of the stand, her earlier composure replaced by a visible tension she could not fully conceal. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The manager did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His presence alone carried enough weight now. "From this moment forward, every guest is acknowledged immediately," he said, his tone calm but firm, each word deliberate. "No assumptions. No exceptions." The hostess nodded quickly, her eyes lowering, the message landing with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. "Yes, of course," she replied, her voice quieter than before, stripped of its earlier confidence. Nearby, the server who had first recognized the card exhaled slowly, as if releasing a tension he had been holding since the moment everything changed. The rest of the staff adjusted almost instantly, their movements becoming sharper, more attentive, as though the entire system had recalibrated in real time. Back at table 7, Sophia opened the menu at last, her fingers turning the page with the same calm precision she had shown from the beginning. Nothing about her demeanor suggested satisfaction or victory. There was no outward reaction to the apology, no visible acknowledgement of the shift she had caused. And yet, everything around her continued to respond. The server returned once more, this time with a quiet confidence that had replaced his earlier caution. "Have you had a chance to decide?" he asked, his voice steady, respectful, but no longer uncertain. Sophia glanced up briefly, her expression composed, her tone even. "I will have the grilled salmon," she said, her voice soft but clear. "And a glass of still water will be fine." "Of course," the server replied, noting her order with careful attention before stepping away. A nearby table fell silent for just a moment longer than usual, a couple exchanging a glance that carried more understanding now than curiosity. They had seen enough to know that something real had taken place, something beyond service, beyond status. At the entrance, a new guest stepped inside, dressed simply, not unlike Sophia had been. This time, the hostess looked up immediately. "Good evening. Welcome," she said, her voice warm, attentive, her eyes meeting the guests without hesitation. For a brief second, her gaze flicked towards Sophia's table, then back again, as if grounding herself in the lesson that had just been delivered without being spoken aloud. The manager watched this exchange from across the room, his expression steady, but there was a subtle nod, almost imperceptible, as though acknowledging that the correction had begun. The room, though still active, now carried a different energy. Not tension, but awareness. Not fear, but accountability. And at the center of it all, Sophia Bennett remained exactly as she had been, quiet, composed, and unmoved by the attention that now surrounded her. She did not need to say anything more, because what had been revealed in that room was no longer about her alone. It was about everyone who had been watching, everyone who had assumed, and everyone who now understood that the smallest moment of dismissal could echo far louder than any words ever spoken. And in that understanding, the silence that had once belonged only to her had spread, touching every corner of the room, leaving behind something far more lasting than embarrassment. It left behind awareness. The meal arrived without delay, plated with the kind of precision the restaurant prided itself on, every detail intentional, every garnish placed with care, but tonight, even perfection felt different, as if it carried the quiet weight of being seen more clearly than before. Sophia thanked the server with a simple nod, her tone unchanged, her presence still grounded in the same calm that had defined her from the moment she stepped inside. She began her meal without ceremony, without drawing attention, as though nothing unusual had happened, as though the entire evening had unfolded exactly as it should. And yet, nothing about the room was the same. The manager continued to circulate, but his movements were no longer routine, his attention sharper, his awareness deeper, as if each guest now represented more than a reservation, more than a table number, but a responsibility he had almost overlooked. At the front, the hostess greeted each new arrival with immediate warmth, her posture straighter, her voice steadier, her eyes meeting every guest with a level of attention that had been missing before. The change was subtle, but it was real. A family entered, dressed simply, their presence quiet, and this time, they were welcomed without hesitation, guided to a table with the same care as anyone else. Across the dining room, conversations resumed their natural rhythm, but something lingered beneath them, an awareness that could not be undone, a shared understanding that had taken root without needing to be explained. A man at a nearby table leaned back in his chair, glancing once more towards Sophia, then lowering his gaze, as though reflecting on something he could not quite put into words. His companion followed his gaze, then did the same. It was not curiosity anymore. It was recognition. Sophia continued her meal at an unhurried pace, her movements steady, her attention focused on the present moment. She did not look around to measure the impact she had made. She did not seek acknowledgement or reaction. Whatever needed to be understood had already been understood. When she finished, the server approached promptly, placing the check gently on the table without being asked, his demeanor respectful, composed. "Whenever you are ready," he said quietly. Sophia reached into her bag once more, this time retrieving a simple card to settle the bill. She placed it on the tray with the same calm precision as before, her actions unremarkable, yet somehow still commanding quiet attention. The transaction was completed quickly, efficiently, without complication. The manager returned one final time, not to oversee, but to acknowledge. "Thank you for joining us this evening," he said, his voice sincere, carrying none of the earlier assumptions that had once defined his approach. Sophia met his gaze briefly, her expression softening just enough to reflect understanding, not approval, not dismissal, but something quieter. "Thank you," she replied. She stood, adjusting her cardigan lightly, her movements as understated as when she had arrived. As she made her way toward the exit, the staff stepped aside instinctively, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. The hostess met her eyes this time, offering a genuine smile, one that did not rely on judgment or expectation. "Have a wonderful evening," she said. Sophia gave a small nod and continued on, the doors opening once more to the cool night air outside. The moment she stepped out, the room behind her did not return to what it had been. It could not, because something had been left behind, not a memory of embarrassment, not a moment of correction, but a quiet standard that would shape every interaction that followed. And though no announcement had been made, no speech given, no name revealed, the lesson remained, steady and undeniable, carried in the way eyes now met, in the way voices softened, in the way assumptions paused before taking form. And that night, in a room once defined by appearances, something far more valuable took its place, a simple truth that required no introduction. Respect is not something you assign based on what you see. It is something you show before you know who stands in front of you.